You have been surrendering your boundaries your entire life, and you never even noticed the theft. Every time you tolerated behavior that made you uncomfortable just to keep the peace, you handed someone permission to push further. Every time you laughed off disrespect instead of confronting it, you trained people to believe that crossing your limits had no consequences. Every time you explained yourself to someone who was determined to ignore your boundaries, you handed them the blueprint to control you. This is the silent erosion of power most men never detect until it is too late. Because boundaries are not just personal preferences. Boundaries are the invisible walls that define your authority over your own life. And the moment someone senses weakness in those walls, they begin testing them, not once, not twice, but constantly. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. A prince who allows small violations will eventually face great ones. A leader who tolerates disrespect in whispers will soon hear it shouted in public. Power is not lost in dramatic moments. Power is lost in quiet compromises that seem harmless at the time. Tonight, you learn how to recognize the tests before they become chains. Because people rarely attack your boundaries openly. They probe them. They stretch them. They test how much they can take before you finally resist. And the man who fails these tests becomes predictable, controllable, and ultimately irrelevant. But the man who recognizes them becomes something else entirely, untouchable. The first sign someone is testing your boundaries is subtle, almost invisible, yet it reveals more about their intentions than 1,000 insults ever could. Sign number 1. They disrespect your time. Time is the purest form of currency a man possesses. It is the only asset that cannot be replenished once spent. Yet people who wish to dominate you rarely steal your money first. They steal your time. They show up late and expect you to wait. They cancel plans without consideration. They interrupt you while you speak. They demand your attention as if your schedule exists for their convenience. This is not carelessness. This is measurement. They are measuring how much inconvenience you will tolerate, because the man who allows his time to be wasted announces something dangerous to the world. My life is not valuable enough to protect. And once that message is sent, people begin treating you accordingly. Machiavelli observed that powerful leaders guarded their time with ruthless precision. They did not grant access freely. They made others wait, not out of arrogance, but out of strategy. Because scarcity creates value. The man who is always available becomes invisible. But the man whose time is limited becomes important. When someone repeatedly wastes your time, they are not simply being inconsiderate. They are studying your tolerance. They are testing whether you will defend your boundaries or surrender them, and the response determines how they will treat you forever. The solution is simple but difficult for most men. You enforce consequences immediately. You do not lecture. You do not complain. You adjust access. If someone disrespects your time, you reduce their access to it. Calls go unanswered. Invitations disappear. Availability becomes rare. And suddenly the same people who treated your time like it was worthless begin treating it like gold. Because power is not established through explanation. Power is established through behavior. The second sign someone is testing your boundaries is more aggressive. They disguise disrespect as humor. You have seen this before. The joke that cuts slightly too deep. The sarcastic comment that undermines you in front of others. The playful insult delivered with a smile, so that if you react, they can accuse you of being sensitive. This is not humor. This is a psychological probe. People who use insults disguised as jokes are searching for one answer. Will you tolerate disrespect if it arrives wrapped in laughter? If you laugh along, they push further. If you ignore it, they escalate. Because in social hierarchies, disrespect spreads like a virus. Once one person gets away with it, others follow. Machiavelli understood the importance of perception in maintaining authority. A prince who tolerated mockery weakened his image not only in the eyes of the offender, but in the eyes of every witness, because people do not respect what others are allowed to ridicule. The man who tolerates these disguised insults slowly becomes the subject of them, but the man who shuts them down once becomes immune to them forever. And the key is not anger. Anger signals emotional vulnerability. The correct response is calm. Correction. You do not laugh. You do not argue. You simply look at them and say something simple. That joke says more about you than it does about me. Or even simpler, we're not doing that. Then you move on. No drama. No lecture. Just a quiet reminder that your boundaries are not negotiable. People test those who appear uncertain, but they retreat from those who appear immovable. The third sign someone is testing your boundaries is one of the most manipulative tactics in human psychology. They ignore your no. This happens constantly in modern life. You decline an invitation and they pressure you again. You set a limit and they attempt to negotiate it. You make a decision and they question it repeatedly. At first it appears harmless, persistent, enthusiastic, maybe even flattering. But look deeper. What they are really saying is this: your boundaries are suggestions, not rules. And if you allow this pattern to continue, something dangerous begins to happen. Your no loses meaning. Once people believe your boundaries are flexible, they stop respecting them entirely. Machiavelli warned leaders never to issue commands that could be ignored, because the moment an order is disregarded without consequence, authority collapses. The same principle governs personal power. Your words must carry weight, and weight only exists when they are backed by action. When someone refuses to accept your no, the mistake most men make is explaining themselves. They justify their decision, they apologize, they negotiate. But explanation signals doubt, and doubt invites pressure. The correct response is repetition. Calm, unemotional, unchanging. No, not louder, not angrier, just unchanged. If they push again, you repeat it. No, and if they push further, you withdraw the conversation entirely. Because a boundary is not something you defend through debate, it is something you enforce through behavior. People quickly learn who can be pressured and who cannot, and once they realize your limits are immovable, something interesting happens. The tests stop, because manipulators, like predators, look for easy prey. They do not waste energy attacking walls made of stone. They search for doors left open. But when you master the art of protecting your time, rejecting disguised disrespect, and enforcing the power of no, something begins to change. People start approaching you differently, more cautiously, more respectfully, more carefully, because the world quickly recognizes one truth about powerful men. Their boundaries are not invitations, their boundaries are laws, and breaking them always comes with consequences. But these first tests are only the beginning, because the people who want control over you rarely stop after 3 attempts. They escalate. Most men believe boundary violations arrive like storms, loud, obvious, impossible to ignore. But the truth Machiavelli understood is far colder than that. Power is rarely stolen through confrontation. It is stolen through gradual normalization. The man who pushes your boundaries does not begin with something dramatic. He begins with something small, something you are tempted to overlook, something that feels easier to tolerate than to challenge. And once that tolerance is detected, the escalation begins. The third sign we began to uncover is far more dangerous than it appears on the surface, because when someone ignores your no, they are not simply being persistent. They are testing whether your authority is real or theatrical. Most men fail this test not because they are weak, but because they are polite. They fear appearing rude. They fear appearing difficult. They fear creating tension in the room. But Machiavelli warned leaders about this exact trap. The prince who prioritizes comfort over authority will eventually lose both. Because every time someone pushes past your refusal and you allow it, a silent contract is written. The contract says, "This man's boundaries can be negotiated." And once that contract exists, people begin rewriting your rules without asking. They borrow things they never return. They interrupt decisions you already made. They push conversations you clearly tried to end. They turn your no into the beginning of a debate rather than the end of one. But the powerful man understands something most people never learn. A boundary that must be defended through explanation is already weak. Authority is not established through persuasion. Authority is established through finality. When someone challenges your no, the correct move is not emotional resistance. The correct move is structural resistance. You do not argue. You do not justify. You do not negotiate. You repeat the boundary once. Then you remove access. Because the moment someone realizes that pushing you leads to distance instead of compliance, they recalibrate their behavior immediately. And this brings us to the fourth sign someone is testing your boundaries. They invade your personal space emotionally, mentally, or physically. This invasion rarely looks aggressive. In fact, it often looks like curiosity. They ask intrusive questions about your finances. They demand explanations for your decisions. They probe into areas of your life that have nothing to do with them. Why did you do that? Why didn't you tell me? Why are you acting different? On the surface, these questions appear harmless. But the deeper motive is control, because questions can be weapons disguised as conversation. The more someone pressures you to explain yourself, the more they attempt to position themselves above your authority. Machiavelli observed that powerful figures never felt obligated to justify every decision. They understood that constant explanation creates the illusion of accountability to those who have no right to demand it. Weak men explain their choices. Powerful men simply make them. When someone repeatedly demands explanations for your boundaries, what they are really saying is this: your autonomy requires my approval. And if you accept that frame, you surrender control over your life. The response is simple but uncomfortable for those who seek approval. You decline the interrogation, not with anger, not with hostility, with calm indifference. I made the decision that works for me. And then you stop talking, no elaboration, no defense, because every additional explanation you give becomes material they can use to challenge your reasoning. But silence leaves. Nothing to attack. Silence closes the door. And when people realize that probing your life yields no additional access, they stop trying. Now we arrive at the fifth sign. Someone is testing your boundaries, and it is one of the most manipulative tactics in modern social dynamics. They manufacture guilt when you prioritize yourself. This is the emotional weapon used against men who are beginning to grow. The moment you start protecting your time, the moment you start saying no, the moment you stop tolerating behavior that once drained you, certain people will react immediately, but not with confrontation, with disappointment. You've changed. You're not the same person anymore. You used to care. These statements are not observations. They are attempts to drag you back into your previous role, because the version of you they liked was the version they could control. Machiavelli warned that when a prince strengthens his position, those who benefited from his weakness will resent the transformation. And this resentment rarely appears as hostility. It appears as guilt. They want you to feel selfish. They want you to feel arrogant. They want you to Believe that protecting your energy is somehow immoral, because guilt is one of the most powerful levers of manipulation. A man driven by guilt becomes predictable. He over-explains. He apologizes for boundaries. He compromises his own needs to maintain harmony. And once people learn that guilt controls you, they use it endlessly. But the powerful man understands something crucial. Boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are self-respect. When someone attempts to shame you for protecting your time, your energy, or your focus, what they are really revealing is their dependency on your compliance. And dependency is not your responsibility. So when someone tries to guilt you for enforcing limits, you do not defend yourself emotionally. You remain calm. You remain steady. You simply say something that removes the weapon from their hands. Yes, I've changed. And you let that statement stand. No apology, no justification, just truth. Because the man who evolves must accept that some people preferred the weaker version of him, and that preference is not a compliment, it is a confession. By now, you begin to see the pattern behind every boundary test. People are not simply interacting with you, they are studying you. Every reaction you give becomes data. Every hesitation becomes permission. Every compromise becomes a new expectation. But once you begin protecting your time, refusing disrespect disguised as humor, enforcing the power of no, declining intrusive interrogations, and rejecting guilt-based manipulation, something begins to shift. The tests become less frequent, the manipulators become quieter, the opportunists begin searching for easier targets, because power is not declared, power is detected. And once people detect that your boundaries are immovable, they stop attempting to move them. Part 3, Signs 6 and 7, is approximately equal to 700 words. By now you understand a truth that most men never discover until years of frustration have already drained their strength. People test your boundaries long before they openly disrespect you. They watch how you protect your time. They observe how you respond to subtle insults. They study whether your no carries weight or collapses under pressure. They measure how easily guilt can bend your decisions. Every reaction you give becomes information. And once they gather enough information, they escalate. The sixth sign someone is testing your boundaries is quiet but extremely revealing. They push you into unnecessary conflict. This tactic is more common than most men realize. Someone provokes you with a comment that feels slightly disrespectful. Someone questions your competence in front of others. Someone creates tension in a conversation that previously had none. And the moment it happens, your instincts ignite. Your pride tells you to respond. Your ego tells you to correct them. Your emotions whisper that silence would make you look weak. But Machiavelli understood something about human psychology that most men never grasp. The person who provokes conflict is rarely interested in the argument itself. They are interested in controlling your reaction. Because the moment you react emotionally, they gain power over the situation. You become predictable. You become visible. You become someone whose behavior can be manipulated. But the man who refuses unnecessary conflict becomes impossible to control. When someone attempts to provoke you, they are not seeking truth. They are seeking dominance. And dominance requires your participation. Without your reaction, their strategy collapses. This is why Machiavelli admired the fox as much as the lion. The fox avoids traps before the lion ever needs to fight, and unnecessary conflict is one of the oldest traps in existence. The weak man takes the bait. The strategic man steps around it. When someone provokes you without reason, you do not rush to defend yourself. You observe. You remain calm. You answer only if the conversation deserves an answer. and if it does not, you simply disengage. Because power does not require you to win every argument. Power requires you to refuse battles that waste your energy. The man who cannot be provoked becomes dangerous, not because he is aggressive, but because he is controlled. Now we arrive at the final sign someone is testing: your boundaries. And it is perhaps the most revealing of all. They watch how you react to disrespect from others. This is the social test. It often happens in groups. One person makes a subtle remark. Another person observes your response. A third person waits to see if the remark goes unchallenged. This moment determines your position within the hierarchy of that room. Machiavelli wrote that reputation is the armor of power. Once that armor cracks, attacks become easier. And this is exactly what happens when disrespect goes unanswered. If someone insults you and you laugh nervously, the room notices. If someone undermines you and you pretend it did not happen, the room notices. Because people unconsciously search for signals of strength and weakness in social environments, and those signals shape how they treat you moving forward. But responding with rage is not the solution. Anger suggests emotional control has already been lost. The powerful response is calm correction. If the disrespect is small, you address it with minimal words. A simple pause, a steady look, a calm statement. Let's keep this respectful. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical, just a clear line drawn in the sand. And if the disrespect continues, you do something even more powerful. You withdraw your presence entirely, because attention is the oxygen of social behavior. When you remove it, the performance ends. This is the final Machiavellian lesson about boundaries. You do not need to fight every disrespectful person. You simply remove them from your world. Your time disappears. Your attention disappears. Your presence disappears. And suddenly, the same people who once tested you begin to wonder why they no longer have access to you. Because the greatest punishment in human psychology is not confrontation. It is irrelevance. And when someone realizes they have lost access to your time, your energy, and your presence, they understand something without you ever saying it. Your boundaries are real. Machiavelli understood this truth centuries ago. Power is not about domination. Power is about control. Control of your reactions. Control of your attention. Control of who enters the territory of your life. The man who controls these things cannot be manipulated. He cannot be provoked. He cannot be pressured into abandoning his limits. And once people recognize this, something fascinating happens. The tests stop. Because predators search for weak defenses. They search for open doors. But when they encounter walls made of discipline, silence, and self-respect, they do what all predators eventually do. They walk away. And that is when you realize something powerful. Boundaries are not about pushing people out. Boundaries are about revealing who never deserved to be inside your world in the first place. If this video opened your eyes to the games people play with your boundaries, then you are already ahead of most men. Power begins the moment you start seeing the tests before they happen, but this is only the beginning. If you want to master the psychology of power, influence, and strategic thinking the way Machiavelli understood it, make sure you subscribe to the channel now. Because the men who understand these lessons move differently in the world, and the ones who don't spend their lives being controlled by those who do.